Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked with me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. And what a week it's been on so many fronts, with all paths leading back to Saudi Arabia, and particularly that bombshell announcement from the PGA. They're going to have the truce with the Live Golf Tour, funded by the PIF. Martyn, did we see this coming so soon?
Not at all. You're right. Bitterness, acrimony. We had court cases with the most sort of, not that perhaps vicious is a bit too strong, but very, very strong language directed at the Saudi Arabia and sport washing. We had Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour, apparently invoking Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11 as a reason why they shouldn't have any part in golf. And suddenly they're all best of friends and, getting ready to get the buckets of money to throw into the world of golf, Tariq.
Yeah, a very sad day for lawyers. Let's just take a moment. Those fees have now gone. This could have dragged on for several more months, a lot more billable hours. Sadly, those gone, so spare a thought for them. But yeah, this has been absolutely stunning. And you mentioned the 9/11 point, and that's the thing that caught my eye. A lot of acrimony, a lot of bitterness. And Jay Monahan, he was interviewed, I think it was on CNBC or one of the American broadcasters, and he talked about being close to families that had lost family members and relatives in 9/11 and said, I believe, that none of the players on PGA have ever had to apologise for being a member of the PGA. Basically, that couldn't be said for the defectors, as he saw them then at Live Golf. And now, those family groups from the 9/11, they're furious, and they're right to be, because it was used as part of a business negotiation. It's just awful.
And we saw in the court case, the PGA called Saudi Arabia deplorable in terms of its human rights record. If we remember what that court case was about, it's about blocking players from being able to join the Rebel Live Tour. And has anything fundamentally changed in Saudi Arabia? Have you heard him actually, as PGA commissioner, saying this week why he believes the Saudi human rights record is any better? Because his organisation is the one that criticised it.
No, of course not. And it just shows actually that they were empty words, because when it comes down to it, money talks, and Jay Monahan is the new chief executive of a new entity, and Yasser Al-Rumayyan, the governor of the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, chairman of Newcastle United, is the chairman of a new entity. So trebles all round, as Private Eye would say.
Let's just contemplate his position. The fact he is, as Al-Rumayyan, not only now chairman of this new golf entity, which is the PGA, it is the DP World Tour, it's the Asian Tour, it's the takeover effectively of golf. He's the chairman of Newcastle United. But the day job is governor of the Public Investment Fund, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is worth, $600 billion. You'd think managing that fund was enough in itself, let alone trying to oversee the world of golf.
Not only golf, and he's off on the football fields as well. But no, the issue with how all of this came down and the suddenness is that both the European Tour and the PGA are members organisations, which means the players often have a say and should be informed of how things are rolling. And they weren't told that this was coming, particularly those on that PGA side, who many of them gave up potentially lucrative millions, thinking Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, but others too. And there was a meeting of the players at the Canadian Open this week with Jay Monahan, and he took a lot of arrows. Apparently, he was called a hypocrite, etc. And there were calls for him to stand down. And you could see that, can't you? I mean, in terms of his reputation among those players, it should be smashed, shouldn't it? He led them down the garden path and then suddenly turned round the other way and done a deal with it's the people he essentially described as a devil.
And the issue is, he was telling these players to stay loyal to the PGA, not to take the vast sums on offer as these signing on fees. Some of them amounted to hundreds of millions. Wasn't Tiger Woods potentially up to $1 billion he could have accepted? He's saying, don't take this money. Now he's taking the money. And these players have missed out on the bonanza that had seen them as being pariahs, but now they're all back in the fold anyway. Tariq, what about those players who didn't take the money and now are out of pocket alongside those live golfers who've got the signing on fees?
Yeah, so looking at the biggest beneficiary, look at Phil Mickelson. He described them, if you remember at the time, in unguarded comments to Alan Shipnuck, a golf journalist, as scary motherfuckers. If you remember, apologies for the language, but that's what he said. But the money was too good, so he's taken in circa $200 million. You mentioned the near $1 billion offer to Tiger Woods, $400 million to Rory McIlroy, and even Jack Nicklaus the Great was asked to be in charge of this event, and he said he didn't want anything to do with it. So that will be interesting. We've heard from Rory McIlroy, Martyn, and he didn't seem to be as exercised as one would have thought, but he did say he hated live, didn't he?
I thought he was as exercised as he could possibly be when he's talking about the people are now bankrolling the organisation who's going to be paying his money. So I thought he did actually seem pretty annoyed by it all, but had to sort of put a brave face on it. Donald Trump actually called this. I mean, I don't think any of us are particularly big fans of Donald Trump, but he did say in July last year that this merger with LIV was inevitable. And he said those golfers that remain loyal to the PGA will pay a big price because all you'll get is nothing but a big thank you from PGA officials who are making millions of dollars. Trump has been proved absolutely right on this one. And I think it's very embarrassing for the officials involved in this. And I'm not surprised that there were lots of calls for Monahan to quit from the players.
And
I wonder if they'll get made whole, though. Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy. I wonder if some kind of... Because you can't have that much of a bad taste in your mouth with your big stars, and it is tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Maybe there's some way of equalising this. And that's the thing. We haven't had the details. We don't even have the name of the company, do we, Rob?
No, we don't. And if we just look at the whole thing, the LIV launch was decrying the whole format of PGA, calling it a monopoly, wasn't it? Saying the players needed to be allowed to be free agents, which they would be in this LIV world. And isn't it now just the established old ways all just forming with LIV? Because LIV wasn't really mentioned, was it, in the announcement? It was a joint partnership with the Public Investment Fund, which would put into doubt the very future of LIV, which, of course, as we've mentioned on the pod in the past, has been a format that's never really caught on with viewers, has it, really?
That's right. No mention of Greg Norman, Chief Executive of LIV Golf. So, yeah, very much a sort of Saudi public investment fund. And I think it raises lots of questions of the future of golf, what it's going to look like, and sport beyond that, Tariq.
Yeah, I mean, one of the details, a few details in this, and that's what made me think that basically Saudi Arabia has bought golf, is this. PGA will still have, it says, the majority of board seats. But every new dollar of investment, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia has the first refusal on. So all of the money, potentially, that runs global golf could now come from Saudi Arabia. And I think, just take a moment to think about that. It's a country that has bought an entire sport, at least the professional ranks of a sport. That is quite stunning. And that's what looks to have happened here. And this is just golf. Saudi Arabia have huge ambitions, as we've talked about on this pod, haven't we?
Well, yeah, it's just one branch of their global ambitions. And what they've shown is they can take on the establishment, they can disrupt, they can cause legal battles, but ultimately emerge victorious. And actually, as we think about the legal battles, I wonder how much that case was a part of needing a deal to be done, because they had already had to produce a load of evidence. Had they started to be deposed in this case, the antitrust suit in the US, and obviously various details could come out about the way LIV operates, the way the Saudi state operates, the way the PGA operates. And we've already referenced one part of that in recent weeks, because they sought sovereign immunity to say that PIF is a sovereign entity of the Saudi state, when, of course, as we discovered through the Premier League, they had those legally binding assurances, the fact that PIF is separate from the Saudi state, not controlled.
There still could be an antitrust case going on beyond this, couldn't there? Because I think there's some. It's now the whole issue of sort of monopoly will be looking into the fact that it's not just the PGA and the DW World Tour, but the Public Investment Fund as well. Is that a sort of monopoly in itself?
Well,
yeah, and let's take a look at where golf might head from here.
Well, yeah, the monopoly case still exists, doesn't it? Either if you're a monopoly with the PGA, you're still a monopoly. Now LIV's involved. You're perhaps even bigger one. You're just all in the one bucket, because the European Tour, the PGA, and LIV are now merged into this one entity. If someone wanted to bring a monopoly case against them, they could, but depends who wants to bring that, right?
Well, it does. Is there a new rival golf entity, maybe another state? No, and actually, even if you do shake things up, you do cause problems, then you might get a deal. You might be brought into the fold.
For sure. If you're taking over entire sport, which obviously this effectively is, it does raise questions. What else could be taken over? I mean, we know that there was a sort of move for Saudi funding to be behind the Club World Cup in 2018. That failed. FIFA couldn't get that off the ground. But I mean, you can see whether like a European Super League thing it's similar, isn't it? That if Saudi put money behind a European Super League, I know it's very difficult now with the Premier League clubs to join, but there's no reason why they couldn't do the same sort of thing in football, cricket, anything, is there?
Is it because actually they didn't have a state behind them, the Super League? It was just, it was 12 important clubs, but perhaps if you'd had the power of Saudi Arabia, then it would have been too hard to resist down the line. And of course, the Saudis tried to do that deal potentially with FIFA to take control of the Club World Cup, the Global Nations League as well.
Yeah, just in the small print, if I remember those documents from that time, very similar. There was this first right of refusal of future global TV rights of the World Cup TV sales. So essentially that would have meant, and it was through SoftBank, which was PIF was a major investor in, that's one way of gaining control. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot of, certainly in football, is private equity companies buying stakes in leagues. We've got La Liga, which has sold a stake to CVC, and talks elsewhere as well. There is a chance that a country like Saudi Arabia, if it had this ambition, could buy a stake in entire leagues. Absolutely.
What about FIFA? Their revenues, they're projecting 11 billion for the next World Cup 4-year cycle. They're already complaining about the lack of TV revenue for the Women's World Cup. Imagine if a country like Saudi Arabia promised to double and underwrite the value of FIFA by, say, 20 billion. And FIFA, you could, in this theoretical scenario, say, well, that's too hard to resist. And suddenly you've got a state in control of a governing body. Even if, like with golf, they say it's like creating a separate commercial body.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something quite, even more remarkable. I think that I can't actually see that happening. I think it's possible, but I think there would be too much opposition. But I can see something like, as you referred to, a league. I mean, somebody might say, how can we compete with the Premier League if you're Serie A, for example? Well, why don't we sell a massive chunk of equity to Saudi Arabia? And then all our clubs will get richer. We can compete with the best, and then we can become the best again, like we were in the 1990s, etc. I think that's entirely possible.
And La Liga have already done that with CVC. We've got the Bundesliga as well. So we've already crossed that sort of notion of selling stakes in commercial entities of the league. Happens to be those capital funds, but could well be a sovereign wealth fund, couldn't it?
It could be. It could be. Depends how you structure these things. Even in the United States, there is has been a ban on private equity investment in clubs. That looks like it's going to be lifted, and particularly sovereign money. Now we're hearing some of that for NBA, for example. There's talk that sovereign funds can't take over entire parts of teams, but might become minority investors. And look, once you're in, then who knows what the future is.
And that leads us into the next big piece of news from Saudi Arabia this week, how we started the week with that announcement that talks about privatising football clubs under the direction of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, but actually seem to be nationalising them as the Public Investment Fund take a 75% stake in 4 of the clubs, including Al Nassr that Cristiano Ronaldo played for. And Tariq, something you wrote about, was on the front page of the New York Times that I saw while I was travelling.
Yeah. Well, it just shows how much resource they're willing to throw at this and how much faith they have. When we say they, him probably, Mohammed bin Salman, has in the people who are running PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So this is the 4 big teams in terms of popularity in Saudi Arabia: Al Hilal, Al Nassr, Ronaldo's team, Al Ittihad, who've just signed Cristiano Ronaldo's former teammate Karim Benzema this week, 200 million, or God knows how many zeros you want to put on that, and a team called Al Ali. This is we've seen this type of thing before, but not at this scale, thinking China. But this is a lot bigger, isn't it? This is the amounts of money, 100 million being offered for Kante and others. The likes of Gundogan also being offered huge amounts of money. This is big.
Yeah, this isn't just transfer fees. We're talking about 100 million. This is wages, 100 million a year, or 100 million euros a year for N'Golo Kante. That's like, I think, basically increasing his salary. He's already the best paid player at Chelsea, or was when he signed, 300,000 a week or something, and that's like making his salary 7 times higher.
Just for context, that 100 million Kante is going to get per year if he signs would be the equivalent of, like, what's the highest a team pays? It's around 300 million. So the biggest teams in the world spend about 300 million a year on wages. And we've said this is Kante, not the best paid player, because Benzema's going to get more, is going to get a third of the entire payroll of a top European team.
Incredible, isn't it? There is one departure, though, to mention, of course, from the Saudi Pro League this week. Gary Cook, the former Manchester City chief executive. Do we know why he's gone after only a few months? Why they said his term had ended?
Yeah, we know where he's going. He's going to join Birmingham City, which is a team in the English second tier, which is about to have some new American owners. But you've got to think there's more to it, Martyn, because he must have been on a king's ransom there. We've been talking telephone numbers for the players. Presumably the executives would have been on the same amount.
Birmingham City, clearly they're going to be, they're paying far more than Saudi Arabia, because I don't think so. I think it's probably a mutual departure of mutual convenience. But he's probably earned quite a lot for his few months in charge there, and will be happily returned to the UK.
To the second division. If you look at, though, the ambitions of the Saudi League, and, some people might scoff at them thinking, even if they're signing these players, they're at the tail end of their careers and there's a few superstars. But if you look at the sort of European League landscape, it is very much dominated by the Premier League. There is La Liga. But even with Messi, Mbappe and the like in France, say the fifth league, there still isn't that sort of huge global appeal. There's some international audience, so maybe they could tap into that and almost displace one of those European leagues to be sort of number 4, number 5 in terms of global interest. Whereas
in the press release to announce this new system, Rob, they said they want to become a top 10 league by 2030. And with all those players, that seems almost certain. Do you think, apart from rubbernecking these transfers, anyone wants to watch these players play, or do you think you care who wins the Saudi League? Do you think people outside of Saudi would care?
Well, it's a favourable time zone for Europe, for Asia, depending how you schedule these matches. And as I was saying, I think, the French League is there to be overtaken potentially, particularly, all these appealing players. But again, we get the situation as we've seen in China before when they were investing in sport, which is there's only a scattering of players perhaps people are familiar with, so they don't have the connection to the others. That is a very Eurocentric point of view, but maybe it actually helped boost the audiences in Asia, and not forgetting the fact Saudi itself is a big media market along with the MENA region as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think having these star players is clearly going to drive some interest, and it in perhaps Asia as much as anywhere else. Having said that, I think a pretty big blow that Lionel Messi is not going, because I think that they must have thrown the huge amounts of money at making an offer for him, but he's decided to go to Inter Milan.
Into Miami, and that shows the confusion.
Into Miami.
Did they ever try to stop that, didn't they, into Milan, Tariq?
Yeah.
That brand,
using
the brand.
That's a good point. Yeah, there was that litigation, wasn't there? And Inter Milan, obviously,
they can use Martyn's clip now in the next case, can't they? Even such an esteemed sports news journalist can mix them up. But yeah, that announcement came through. It had been trailed. Your paper, The Times, did say it. End of last year, Matt Lawton. But then there had been this move towards going to Saudi Arabia, and what an incredible statement there was from Barcelona about their talks with him and why he didn't return. It's talked about him wanting less of the spotlight and going to a less demanding league. What a moment that was in that statement, Tariq.
It felt very petty. Felt very, very petty, didn't it? I mean, the announcement itself was very interesting. Messi obviously has a deep connection not only to Barcelona, the club, but also the city. He moved there when he was 12, and everything he became was through the ranks of Barcelona. So the announcement was made in this joint interview with the two Catalan sports papers, and it was this joint interview. And in it, he did say he wanted to kind of have some place where his family could have less pressure, I guess. But you're right. It was a very from his point of view, must have been very disappointing to see that statement from FC Barcelona.
And as we've been talking about the Saudi League perhaps not having the appeal, what about Major League Soccer? He is joining a league that has this big global Apple TV rights deal, but there is a questionable impact to the league globally and how much actually interest there is in watching his games, because there was no real sense, and this is just anecdotal, that suddenly a lot of people were watching PSG in the French league more because just Messi was there. Of course, there would be some, but it didn't gain huge status. So what would it do for MLS?
I wonder if it may have Apple have the global rights now, don't they? So that everybody anywhere in the world who's got Apple TV will be able to watch Major League Soccer. So I suppose that is a big draw factor. But they're not paying a huge amount in terms of, when you look at sort of TV rights for a football competition. I think it's $1 billion over 10 years, something like that. But it's $2.5 billion, so $250 million a year. Thank you.
Still not a lot. Compare that to the Premier League, it's peanuts, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So I've seen reports and that some of the Apple TV money may actually go directly to Messi, or a proportion of it, and I do think it will drive interest in it. But I'm still sort of amazed that if the financial offer from Saudi Arabia can be matched by Inter Miami, or the MLS somehow, or unless they're going to do something like they did with David Beckham, where they basically gave him a franchise when he, as part of the deal when he moved there.
Well, what we've reported in terms of the deal is very much that in terms of the Apple TV contract, if I think it's a profit share of any increase in subs, you'll need a very good accountant and lawyer to go through all of this as well. There's some of this is going to be in relation to Adidas, which sponsors all of the league's teams, so it makes the jerseys for every team in the league. And the ownership stake is a question of how much the owners, the main owners, are the Mass brothers, Cuban Americans, South Florida, and obviously David Beckham has a minority share as well. So the package together, if all goes well, he's not going to be a pauper. But beyond the first couple of matches, there is Messi in Major League Soccer or Ronaldo in Saudi Arabia. Do you think they're consistent new audience to these things? I mean, will he play every week? Does he care as well?
And what are his ambitions with Argentina? Is he building towards Copa America? Seems like he won't play at the next World Cup, although hasn't he sort of gone back on saying Qatar when he won was his last appearance at the World Cup?
It seems like he wants to play in the next World Cup. But again, if he does, 3 years in a backwater league, well, he obviously
you're
rests
going to
his
get
legs
some
a bit.
complaints there, won't you, calling it a backwater?
Yeah, you can email Rob. You can email Rob Harris at Rob Harris's email with any complaints.
But of course, the 2026 World Cup is in the US.
That level of elite performance. Yeah, of course.
Well, what we perhaps overlooked
David
his time
Beckham
at Paris Saint-Germain.
He played in the MLS, didn't he? So David Beckham played in the MLS, I think, and still played international football for England. So
he came out on loan, didn't he, Martyn? Though he came to AC Milan and Paris Saint-Germain. So perhaps Messi, we'll see, might get that goodbye that he wanted. He's really upset that he didn't get the goodbye. He left very emotionally. Barcelona was in that financial crisis, and they pretty much ushered him out of the door. He didn't get a chance to say goodbye to a full Nou Camp stadium, stadium that's cheered him for all those years.
And what about his time at Paris Saint-Germain? 2 seasons there, no Champions League win. That was probably the big hope for them to land that prize the first time. Of course, won domestic titles. Was it a success? Maybe the fact he was a PSG Qatari funded club player while he won the World Cup in Qatar.
Maybe for them, not for him. I mean, if you see his comments in those interviews, which he announced he's going to Miami, he, in his words, made it sound like it was quite a miserable 2 years for him. And of course, for the fans as well, those who attend the stadiums, not the ones on the internet who sort of tweet and follow Instagram, the ones who go to the ground, they booed him, didn't they? They jeered him for the last 6 months. And, this is a guy who's won everything and just won the World Cup. They didn't think that he put all his heart and soul into efforts for PSG. He obviously sees that differently, but it seems a very sad end for his time in European football, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see when he does make his debut for Inter Miami, as we will get their name correct. But, as we sort of survey the football landscape beyond there, we are building up to the Women's World Cup. The Saudi link to that, as the thread goes through everything this week. Of course, FIFA had to drop that Visit Saudi sponsorship amid the backlash from players and the host nations, Australia and New Zealand, just a few weeks ago. But we have a new case of pressure being applied on FIFA, delivering some results, which as the players through FIFA, the Players Union, were calling for funding for themselves to actually get some pay for the first time directly. And they have managed to secure that from FIFA, because we had the national associations this week's being informed that for the first time, there will be guaranteed individual player incomes via FIFA for the Women's World Cup. And actually, if you look at the numbers, I think in many cases, they'll be earning more for being at the World Cup individually than on average for their teams, because, even in the Women's Super League in England, players can only be on perhaps tens of thousands of pounds a year. And if we just take a look at those numbers, so if you only go out in the group stage, you will earn $30,000 per player. If you do win the World Cup, well, each player will get $270,000 per player, won't they?
Yeah, I think that's a really good move, actually, by FIFA. And yes, considerably more than they'll earn for their clubs, most of them, especially those that, who go all the way and win it. So, in a way, to me, that almost feels like how it should be in a way, because it is the biggest prize in women's football and should be rewarded in that sort of way. I can see people think, your bread and butter is your club, but I think if you get to the pinnacle of the women's game, you should be rewarded in this way, and they are. So I think, well done, FIFA.
Yeah, the prize money, I think, is a big deal, and the fact that it's publicised and it shows that women can make a living out of football, not just a few in Europe, but it's pointing out a better trend, isn't it? It's trending upwards, and girls who are at school can kind of dream of being professional footballers like young boys do, and I think that's quite important.
And even if you aren't necessarily earning that huge salary at your clubs, it means if you are one of the 23 players for your country who makes it to the World Cup, and there are 32 teams as of this year at the World Cup, in fact, you will get the income. Also, they have increased prize money, FIFA, but it's still, of course, well below the men's World Cup. It's $110 million in performance-based fund for the teams, $11.5 million for the club benefits program. Effectively, that's the cash going to all the clubs who release players for the tournament, and $30 million for preparation money, which, of course, is very important in terms of trying to raise those technical standards. So $152 million in total, but what is that? Still about a quarter of the men's World Cup. And of course, Gianni Infantino would say, well, that's why the broadcasters should pay more and should pay closer to the men's World Cup income, so they're not funding it out of perhaps their $4 billion cash reserves.
Well, I think FIFA has a lot of money. What was that figure you mentioned? Was it 11 billion that they're going to have in their predicted?
They've told everyone how much money they're going to make. Yeah.
They can probably afford that. They could probably afford to perhaps spend a bit more money on their sort of green energy credentials, because they've had a bit of an embarrassing thing this week, haven't they? When they've effectively a watchdog organisation in Switzerland have said their claims of having a fossil-free World Cup were misleading consumers by saying it was carbon neutral, and actually it wasn't at all.
Well, this was one of the features of the World Cup in the build-up. Yeah, I mean, we'd hear from the Qataris so often, of course, about these carbon neutrality claims, and FIFA didn't exactly push back in their statement, did they, against the ruling? They just sort of defended themselves. I think, as we would see it.
I think they just took it. And again, it makes you wonder, like, the moment around the World Cup from a PR point of view is the most important in terms of eyeballs and interest and all of that. So you perhaps say anything now where how many months down the line, no one's really paying that much attention to FIFA in between tournaments. They've had a wrap around the knuckles, and they hope it's a bad headline that will go away within 24 hours.
And if we look at that FIFA statement, they acknowledge climate change is one of the pressing challenges of our time. They're fully aware of the impacts of mega events. And that was about the limit of it. But they have been found to be perhaps stretching things in those regards. One for Gianni Infantino there. As we close up a sport we don't feature that often, but we have mentioned the snooker match fixing case in the past. And Martyn, something you've been covering, huge bans in this case, aren't there?
Yeah, probably actually the biggest match-fixing scandal in British sport in the last 10 years. 10 Chinese players fixed matches in British competitions and some European ones as well. 2 of them got given life bans, the rest between 1 year, 8 months and 8 years. Most, I think all bar one have gone back to China. But there is, interestingly, criminal prosecutions could follow. Information is being sent by World Snooker to the Gambling Commission and to the Chinese authorities, because it's not just the players involved. I mean, some of these players were like really young. One of them was only 16 when he first fixed a match. Incredible. Yang Bin Tao. He went on to win the 2021 Masters. He's now 23. He's got a lengthy ban, but as you say, they were preyed upon basically by older players. Liang Wenbo, a 36-year-old with a conviction for violence. He was basically putting pressure on these young players, especially during COVID when they're all living together in Sheffield. And they were these people on the outside of them, sort of associates of Liang, not connected with World Snooker, so they can't be banned, but they were In one case, I think there was a profit was made from £30,000 from a sort of very low key snooker match, and that was split between a variety of people. And a big chunk of it went to the people who were sort of associates, and I think the sort of shadowy figures in the background.
Yeah, I mean, look, Chinese sports and corruption is not a stranger, is it? I mean, we talked about this recently. The Chinese football scene is pretty much brought to its knees from the top of the FA down, with corruption and embezzlement allegations across the board. There, that this case, I guess, is another black mark for Chinese sports. But I wouldn't hold your breath in terms of China cooperating, extraditing people for potential criminal charges to Britain. I just can't see that happening at all.
Yeah, sign of how actually corruption can be uncovered in sport. And another sport that has had significant governance issues and questions over it is boxing. And particularly how this relates to boxing at the Olympics. So what's the decision this week from the International Olympic Committee? And why is it that boxing will still be at the Paris 2024 Games as they hope?
The IOC have basically decided to strip recognition from the International Boxing Association, the IBA, headed by Russian Umar Kremlev. They're going to continue with boxing under the IOC's control for Paris, but I think what they're doing here basically is pulling the rug from under the feet of the IBA, which is an interesting move because there has been a sort of breakaway organisation, a new World Boxing, which the Americans, the Dutch, the British are behind. So it looks like the IOC are trying to get a new international federation that they can deal with. The IBA have reacted furiously, saying this is truly abhorrent by the IOC.
Well, you have to be very careful here, the IOC, to be honest, because they're supposed to be independent of these. They can't favour one of these organisations over the other, really. If they put their hand on the scales, despite what people believe and think about the Kremlev-led organisation, the old guard, if you like, the IOC has to let boxing decide what governing body it has, and then maybe reinstate it. But if this is like, we pick this one over that one, that causes new problems from a legal perspective.
Final decision resting with the IOC session. Well, it's been good to speak. Hopefully things have sounded okay as I speak from an airport. Tariq, you're also abroad. Martyn, you're back in England, but certainly a busy week it's been, hasn't it, with everything so connected with Saudi Arabia. How politics and geopolitics intersects with so much of sport.
Yeah, great to be with you guys. Safe travels, Rob, and I think you've been in Prague, heading elsewhere now, and we'll catch up next week.
Yeah, good to speak. Yeah, fresh from the Europa Conference League final. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. As ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But for now, goodbye.